This is Karim. I'm a professor at San Francisco State University in the Department of Comparative and World Literature, and I am the director for the Center for Iranian Diaspora Studies, which is co-presenting with Professor Kasturi Ray today's talk. So I call on you, Dr. Kasturi Ray.
Oh, hello. I'm Kasturi Ray. I'm a professor in the Women and Gender Studies Department. We run a lecture series every year, and we run it as a class. So many of the folks on the screen are enrolled in the class. They have some questions to ask Professor Moradian when she can join us. And I'm so delighted that my dear colleague, Persis Karim, in the Center for Iranian Diaspora Studies, continues to collaborate with Women and Gender Studies to bring really cutting edge folks to campus. Folks who are very brave in their leadership. And I think in that way they mirror Persis. So really delighted to collaborate today. And I'll go around, maybe I'll just call on the next person and then the next person can call on someone. So Zaria, are you there? Maybe you can just introduce yourself quickly.
Hi, I'm Zaria. Senior Women and Gender Studies major. Looking forward to the talk. I don't know who to call on. I'll call on Kelsey, I guess.
Hi, my name is Kelsey. I am a Women and Gender Studies master's student, and I use she, her pronouns. I will call on Cynthia next.
Hi, my name is Cynthia, and I'm also a master's student, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'll pass it to Lynn if she hasn't gone yet.
Oh no, okay. Well, you can put something in the chat if you'd like. And I'll go ahead and call on Patrick.
Hello, my name is Patrick. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns, and I am a transfer junior, women's and gender studies major, looking to eventually pursue my master's in library science. And I am very excited to be here, and I have been very much enjoying this class thus far, and I really love to be able to see all of these wonderful speakers.
Do you want to call on someone, Patrick?
Oh, goodness gracious, I completely forgot. I'll call on Kitty.
Hi, I missed the prompt, but I think we're doing name and degree program. Okay, cool. I'm Kitty, my pronouns are they, them. I'm in the Women and Gender Studies department for my bachelor's. I also have a minor in queer ethnic studies and sexuality studies. I'm not sure who hasn't gone yet, but I think I saw Lynn posted in the chat.
So maybe I'll call on Che.
Hi, everybody. My name is Che. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns. And I'm an MFA in cinema student. Kind of just taking this class for fun, and it's been so good so far. And I guess I'm not sure who's gone or not, but I'm going to try Saba. Have you gone yet?
Hi, my name.
Oh, shoot. Oh, sorry. That was
Hi.
Sorry, I meant to unmute you, not mute you. Sorry.
Hi. Oh, no problem. Hi, my name is Saba Farwell. I am a BAMA part of the BAMA program. I go by she, her pronouns. And is the question, why am I in the class? Why are we taking the class? or
I don't
no?
know, just however you want to introduce yourself. Do you want to
Oh.
share your news, or are you tired of sharing?
No, I'm not. I'm tired, but not tired of sharing. I just had a baby last week, so I'm a little bit exhausted, but doing well and happy. So thank you, guys. All right, thanks. Bye.
Modeling commitment right here.
Yeah, a week-old baby and she's in a seminar. Fantastic.
That's how good we do things in women and gender studies, Persis. Yeah.
I can see. I thought you're supposed to give women a break.
Excuse me, intellectual community is nourishing. Okay.
Yes, I'm joking.
Maybe I'll call on Johnny.
Hello. I was having trouble opening the link, so I missed the question.
Oh, sorry, Johnny. We're just doing introductions.
Oh, hello. My name is Johnny. I go by they, them pronouns. I'm also in the blended MA program for Women and Gender Studies. And I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Persis, should I just call on folks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're waiting for Manijeh, everybody. So we're using the opportunity to create a more intimate and friendly space.
I'd like to call on my other boss, Crystal. Thank you for coming from CEDAW. Would you be able to introduce yourself, Crystal?
Sure. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Crystal, and I'm the interim director of CEDAW. I'm really interested in today's topic, and most importantly, I'm here to support Kasturi.
Thank you so much. Elmira, are you comfortable introducing yourself?
Yeah, of course. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, cool. I'm Elmira. I'm a PhD student in comparative literature at UC Davis. I met Professors Kasturi and Moradian at a conference over the summer, so I'm very excited for this talk and very thankful for SFSU for opening up the session for those of us outside of this specific university. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself? Well, thanks for putting it in the chat. Golzar, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Golzar. I'm an Iranian living in San Francisco, but I'm not in your class. I'm thankful to be here, though. Thanks for opening it up.
Thank you for coming. And I'm sure, Katie, I don't know if we've heard from you yet.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry the MTA was not on my side today, but I'm very happy to be here finally, and I really sincerely apologize for keeping you all waiting. I'm so sorry.
Oh, Manijeh, we're so delighted you came. We were just doing introductions.
Oh, okay, great.
No,
Great.
so please take a breath. And thank you so much for fitting us in today. So Katie was just introducing herself.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm Katie Shahanda. I'm from London. I'm from SOAS, University of London, and I'm a teaching assistant. I'm also final year PhD candidate, and my research is actually contemporary Iranian women artists, but very much issues of gender, and I've been very involved with the happenings currently in Iran and writing a lot. I also sort of contribute to various publications. I've been sort of writing a lot about this and trying to sort of amplify the voice of women in Iran.
Thank you so much for joining us. I dread to ask what time it is in London.
Oh, it's only 8:40 actually. It's not that bad.
Okay, that's good. And Ariana, I don't know if you've had a chance yet to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ariana. I work at the center with Persis. I do communications and social media, pronouns, she, her, or they, them, both are fine. Yeah, very excited to be in this space with you all.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming together today to talk about something really important with one of the most brilliant people talking about it. So Manijeh, I'm so delighted that you found time to come and speak to us. Manijeh Moradian is the author of This Flame Within, which members of the class have read parts of. In this book, you'll find that Manijeh's commitment to the Iranian diaspora is deep and wide. She was able to get interviews, admissions from a range of Iranians living outside of Iran. And what they shared with Manijeh testifies to Manijeh's standing in the community, that she was able to elicit these responses and then share them with us. So I can also testify personally that Manijeh is a wonderful comrade, and we miss her on the West Coast, but glad she's holding it down on the East. But I just wanted to begin by saying that she's a leader in the Iranian diaspora community. I am so grateful that to read a cultural nationalist history that is uncompromisingly feminist, and that it makes room for understanding organizing outside of perhaps masculinist tenets. It places a lot of understanding in the mechanism of affect and showing us how much affect is important for organizing across differences. I also so appreciate that what are often considered fault lines in organizing, usually gender and sexuality, class, become for Manijeh areas of curiosity, ones that don't derail from organizing, but actually are important rails of that organizing. And it's so rare to read a feminist cultural history, and I'm so grateful to have this one to read. You'll find that the writing is beautiful, perhaps because Manijeh not only has a PhD in American Studies from NYU, but she also has an MFA in creative nonfiction from Hunter College at CUNY, which is kind of a sister organization to the CSUs. So really happy to have you here. And you'll find that all of these experiences have led Manijeh to write a groundbreaking work. So I thought, Manijeh, we could start by just thanking Persis and Ariana, the Center for Iranian Diaspora, for sponsoring this talk and being such conscientious members of the activist community out here and bringing, us all together. Really appreciate the Center for Iranian Diaspora. I believe they have some more events coming up that Ariana might share with us a little bit later on. But Manijeh, thank you again. I just wanted to open by asking you how you are, and if you'd like to tell us a little bit about your intellectual journey.
I would love to. And first, let me just thank you, Dr. Ray, for assigning my work, for teaching my work. That's really exciting for me since it's brand new. Thank you so much for devoting this class to thinking about it. And I want to deeply thank Dr. Karim, who really is the true leader of the Iranian diaspora. And I think I was mostly riding her coattails in terms of getting access to the interviews that I think it was largely her standing that got me in the door with a lot of the folks, especially in the Bay Area, because she has built such deep and lasting and meaningful relationships with so many Iranians and understood how important their stories were, and Dr. Karim was a very early champion of this project, supporting it in ways large and small for many, many years. So it's wonderful to be with the SF State community and to, uplift the work of the center there, which is really, which is unprecedented. It's our first and only center. So I'm really thrilled to be contributing to this larger intellectual project that Dr. Karim has been at the helm of for a long time. And so, my intellectual journey is, I really became a student activist, not unlike the folks that I write about. When I got to college, it was, I think, 1993. That's a while ago. But I was kind of looking for the activists, and some of the folks that I interviewed, when they came here from Iran, they were also looking for the activists. They wanted to be, they saw coming to the US and going to college as an opportunity to get involved in activism. And in my own ways, I also felt that. And so I got involved in a whole range of different kinds of activism, but I would say one of the main threads was anti-war organizing, which I actually, was a focus, especially after 9/11, but even before that. So I was doing a lot of anti-war organizing. I was working with a socialist organization. So that was another interesting resonance with some of the folks I interviewed, even though they were much, much older. We had read a lot of the same books. And we had a little bit of a common language that we could use in terms of talking about different Marxist and socialist and leftist genealogies and traditions and debates. So I kind of understood a little bit about the different, like the range of different kinds of leftist ideas that some of these folks had adhered to. I had my own kind of relationship to that socialist tradition that they were engaged with too. So, but then when I was in my late 20s, I actually decided to move to Iran. And that had a huge impact on my intellectual journey. I got a one-way ticket. I went to Iran to meet my relatives because my entire extended family is there. My father was the only one who came here. My mother is American. So because of the long war with Iran and Iraq in the 80s, for most of my childhood, you couldn't even go to Iran. So I really wanted to kind of try to undo some of the effects of assimilation and racism that I'd experienced growing up in the United States. So I wanted to go to Iran. I wanted to build relationships with my relatives, and I wanted to learn to speak Persian. I wanted to be able to communicate and kind of reclaim that language that I hadn't grown up with. So that exposed me to a whole society, and really made Iran into something living and breathing and alive and real and complex, right? That history didn't stop in 1979, like some folks in the diaspora kind of acted as if it had for a long time. That Iran was very much, a dynamic and changing society. And so it was really important to get to engage with that society. And through different friendship networks, I connected with some feminist activists in Iran in 2004 and 2005. I kept going back every year. So I stayed for 6 months the first time, and then I would go back every year for about a month. And I did that for over a decade. And so I kind of got to dip in and out of people's lives and kind of maintain a lot of those relationships and see kind of the arc of how things changed from about 2004, through I think my last trip was 2016. So all of that had a huge impact on my intellectual journey and spurred me to go do the MFA because I wanted to write about my experiences in Iran, my experiences with my family, and from that kind of as we feminists like to do, kind of, through an exploration of embodied histories, lived experience, emotions, kind of theorize outward into like larger questions of history and migration, geopolitics, the whole phenomenon that a lot of Iranian diasporic folks articulate, which is that of being caught in between kind of the US and Iran as these sort of polar opposites, you know, and how each government positions itself as like the polar opposite of the other. And, you know, I really wanted to challenge some of that and work through some of that. So I was writing this memoir, and then I decided that I also wanted to, you know, I also wanted to write in a different register, and I wanted to do research, and I wanted to write, you know, more of a scholarly work. And so some wise friends said, well, go do a PhD because you have support then to do that, you know? And so I did. And what was great about doing a PhD in American Studies at NYU is it really was a center of the study of US empire. And it was at a moment when American studies had already kind of taken a transnational turn. So people were really not just thinking about the US, but were really thinking about displacements, migrations, you know, kind of the way that populations have circulated, and thinking a lot about diaspora. And it was also a place where there were some really fantastic feminist and queer studies scholars who were really trying to bring the study of gender and sexuality into the heart of studies of empire and transnationalism, globalization, and the rest of it. So I was there at a great time. I got to work with wonderful people. Yeah, I think that's, there's always more to say, but I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
And you've stayed in New York. You're currently at Barnard College, which is good place to get an education, if I may say so myself.
That's right.
And how are you finding staying in New York, helping your work with the diaspora?
Well, New York was a very interesting place to be in 2009, when, of course, there was the so-called Green Movement in Iran, a kind of uprising around democratic rights and voting rights that happened in Iran in 2009, and it really galvanized the diaspora in New York. It brought a lot of people into the streets, and it also brought a lot of people into the streets who were recent immigrants from Iran. It wasn't just folks who'd been here for decades. It was a lot of like younger folks, people who'd come here on student visas, and so who were deeply connected to the Islamic Republic, and who had, you know, in fact, we all went and voted. I actually voted in that election because I have Iranian citizenship. So, you know, there was a way that, like, partly because of social media, partly because of more recent waves of immigrants, you know, whose formative years were in the Islamic Republic, there was a way that the diaspora felt like not so separate from Iran, but more connected. And we really wanted to be in solidarity with that movement. And so there was a lot of organizing that happened. And one of the things that happened there that was really important for my intellectual journey and for eventually the book, is that I was part of forming the Raha Iranian Feminist Collective in the summer of 2009. And this was formed really because we wanted to be in solidarity with the Green Movement, but when we would go to the diasporic protest or demonstrations in New York, we were not really happy with the discourse. It was very nationalist. It was a lot of pro-monarchy, like bring the Shah back or bring the Shah's son back or something. We really didn't want that. And there was also not much awareness of location. The fact that we were standing in the United States and in New York City, you know, in a country that was, you know, has been sanctioning Iran for many decades, and also was always sort of like threatening maybe to go to war with Iran. And so it felt uncomfortable for us to be like standing in the United States, like chanting slogans against the Iranian, you know, like we didn't want to have our support co-opted by a kind of neoconservative pro-war foreign intervention kind of agenda. And we saw actually a lot of Iranians, even at that time, supported that kind of agenda. And we wanted to differentiate ourselves. And we also wanted to bring in, you know, a feminist politics, because we sort of thought, well, here we go again, where there's like a big national uprising and issues of gender equality, issues of sexuality are just totally marginalized and sidelined, you know, and we don't want to just be, you know, we wanted to intervene in that, you know. So we formed in that moment, and we had a good 10 years, I think, or almost of organizing together and doing different events, International Women's Day events, and writing some things. And I feel like it was through that work with the Raha Feminist Collective that I was part of sort of developing what became a really key analysis for the book. And I don't think folks read chapter 6 for your class, which is fine, but that's where I kind of flesh it out further, but which is this idea that we need a kind of intersectional anti-imperialism, which is what I'm calling it. There's probably other names, maybe better names, but this is a term I'm sort of using as a way of trying to encapsulate the idea that it's, the Iranian government, one of its major legitimizing discourses is anti-imperialism, because of course the 1979 revolution was a revolution against the US-backed dictatorship, the Shah. It was successful, it overthrew the Shah and really did kick the US out of Iran and remove US domination from, the country. However, that didn't result in equality, democracy, freedom, justice, all the things that people actually really wanted when they were part of overthrowing the Shah. They really expected that things were going to be better, more just, more equal, and the like. And of course, that didn't happen. Nonetheless, the Islamic Republic continues to use this sort of anti-imperialist discourse to legitimize itself and also to denigrate dissidents, so that anyone who tries to organize for women's rights or workers' rights or climate justice or anything, they would label as like foreign and a threat, and sort of use this kind of anti-imperialism to like discredit folks and justify repression and crackdowns. So I was trying to figure out, how from the space of the US, which is an imperialist country, which has waged war on Afghanistan, Iraq, many other places, but I mention those two because they're on both sides of Iran's borders, right? And Iran's kind of encircled in that way, and sanctions and all of these things have really contributed to, they're not the only cause, but they're a major cause of hardship for ordinary Iranians. I wanted to figure out how from the space of the US can we be critical of both Islamic Republic repression, right, especially around gender, sexuality, and ethnic and religious minorities, and also class. But and how can we do that? How can we criticize the Islamic Republic and stand in solidarity with people resisting without feeding into a kind of pro-imperial discourse in the West, right? So trying to negotiate multiple overlapping sources of oppression, which I think is what intersectional feminism is about, but I'm trying to do that transnationally, and particularly in the context of this US versus Iran conflict, which is really a trap, for anyone in Iran trying to trying to transform their society, as people have been recently, then they get labeled Western, right? So they're sort of caught between that binary, and it's really destructive and damaging. And in diaspora, people often feel like they have to pick a side, like to be anti-imperialist means you don't criticize the Islamic Republic, or to support freedom in Iran means you, sort of by any means necessary, even and including foreign intervention, right? So these are sort of poles that really are problematic, and are sort of, I'm trying to think of another way. And so bringing intersectional feminist frameworks to bear on this problem, I felt like we could say, well, look, Iranian people are suffering from multiple forms of oppression, external and internal, right? Domestic and foreign. Gender, sexuality, class, ethnicity, yes, and also imperialism, right? And also fundamentalism, Islamic fundamentalism, right? There are multiple overlapping sources of oppression. So that's some of how the work I did with Raha ended up feeding into my own intellectual, knowledge production, my own ways of thinking. And what was great about studying the Iranian Students Association, to bring it to the book, and then I'll pause, is that, of course, this was before 1979, but nonetheless, this was a diasporic formation that opposed the domestic dictatorship and foreign imperial powers at the same time, right? And of course, they were in alignment then, so it was sort of easier, you didn't have to twist yourself into as many knots theoretically to sort of, or conceptually to talk about these things. It was sort of easier, but nonetheless, it was a really important practice and precedent, I think, for what I would like to see unfold today in terms of diasporic politics. So.
Thank you. I think you've really laid out the difficulty of threading the needle and having a feminist response that doesn't shy away from the contradictions, right? So easy to pretend that these things didn't happen, but then we don't go forward. With your permission, I'd love to open up the rest of the session to questions from our audience.
Absolutely. That would be lovely. And hopefully I'm going to attempt in my answers to weave in, I do have some slides, some gems from the archive that I hope to kind of weave into my answers. So we'll see if I can be that sort of deft and spontaneous about it. Hopefully it's going to work out. But yes, I'm very much looking forward to the questions.
So Ariana, can we make Manijeh a co-host so that she can share slides?
Oh, great.
Yes, I'll do that right now.
Thank you. So any questions?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say I loved hearing your intellectual journey because I know it, but I'd never heard you put it together in that thread. And I think it's really important for students to understand that we bring ourselves to the project. It's not made up out of our heads, but it's a journey. And so it was really lovely to hear you kind of identify all the paths that brought you to this current moment. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's actually useful to talk about it. You know, it's good to process it in this way. Thank you so much.
Aria has a hand up.
Well, yeah, first of all, I wanted to say that I really enjoyed listening to that. And as a Persian born in the United States, I really, what I related to was when you said how you were born here, but you went and spent time there to kind of reassimilate, because growing up in America, you become American, but you understand what your relatives in Iran are going through. And that would be coming, like in this day and age, how I see what's going on in Iran. And I almost want to, it's a weird feeling of wanting to go and see, but at the same time, I understand through what my mom has told me and my relatives that it's not what you think, because you're not used to it. And my question would be, how do you, as a person, as a 18-year-old living in America with all my relatives living in Iran, how do I reach that kind of reassimilation to that culture?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, I don't know if, I mean, some people are still going back and forth. I think now is a hard time to go. I don't know that it's super safe if you have a US passport. So I wouldn't suggest physically going there right now. That was available to me as an option. And it did, it was transformative for me. But as far as if you can't physically go there, I mean, you know, when I first went there, it was 2004, like blogs had just started. Like now, because of social media, all of its problems, like I think that there's more connectivity than ever before, you know, like we can actually be in very close contact and sort of follow, you know, almost daily as we were last fall, you know, events on the ground, and you can watch videos from the street and feel like you're there, you know, so there's a way that you have much more access to sort of daily life and to being connected. I mean, I used to have to like buy a phone card and dial like 3,000 numbers to like call a landline to like, you know, so I think the connectivity, you know, you have a lot more access, you know. I think one huge issue is language. And, you know, I'm not fluent in the Farsi. It's very difficult to learn a language as an adult, but I will say that I got to a point where I can communicate and hold conversations, and I can understand a lot. And that makes a huge difference to be able to talk to people in their own language. So, you know, if, you know, you might, I don't know how good your Farsi is, but that's something that you could put attention on, is like how to be able to, you know, be more fluent and be able to really talk to people directly Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, social media is how I see everything that's going on. So I definitely agree. And as for the language, I need to work on my Farsi. So.
Yeah, and it's really hard. I mean, I actually have forgotten a lot. It's like if you don't use it, I used to go, like I said, to Iran every year, and then it was just total immersion, but then after Trump got elected and did the Muslim ban and cut the deal, and like it felt like risky to go. So I haven't been back. So I feel it, you feel the distance, you feel it. So thank you for that question. Should I call on people, or Dr. Ray, do you want? Okay, I'll just go in the order that I see the hands popping up. Anna?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi. I had a question when you were talking about this binary of the Western culture and how they like saw the you can say the issues of everything. How would you say, like, with the feminist approach and the international approach, that you can like try to avoid this Western bias, especially when we were reading these texts? I would say, like, I'm definitely reading it from a Western perspective, and I want to avoid having this bias and have my solutions to what to do. So how would you say you can approach that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you for that. I mean, I think that part of it is how we situate ourselves in the West. And so I think, you can, so for example, the Iranian students that I write about in the book, right? They came to the West, in the 60s and 70s, and they obviously came as sort of agents of great privilege. They came to get these Western degrees, and then they were supposed to go back home and help to oversee the modernization, the capitalist development of Iran in accordance with US capitalist models and also a US worldview, right? So they were really supposed to be, that's why I call them imperial model minorities. They were really supposed to model the benefits of a kind of Westernization, Western influence in the context of the Cold War, but nonetheless. But instead, the folks who joined the ISA, at least, I mean, most Iranian foreign students, kind of went along with that, but for the few thousand of them that didn't, they situated themselves in the West with the West as a site of struggle, the West as a site of contestation, the West as a site of racism and class oppression and the waging of multiple wars, like in Vietnam. And they saw the West as a kind of imperial metropole, right, where they could actually work in solidarity with other foreign student populations and also other racialized and marginalized US populations. So I think what's very instructive for me about their approach, one is that I love that, it's sort of unpredictable. It's like, we sometimes think that the only source of sort of radical politics is like the most marginalized people. And it is, of course, important to center people who have been marginalized. But what I love about this example of the imperial model minority gone rogue, if you will, is that it's very unpredictable. Sometimes you can have the development of quite radical consciousness and ideas from within the heart of a kind of imperial, within relatively privileged context. And that's, to me, that's very subversive as well, and really important as well. And maybe I relate to it because I went to an elite college and joined a revolutionary socialist organization. So, in other words, it's not such a simple story that the status quo just reproduces itself. There's always the potential for things to go awry, so to speak, in a good way. And so what I really like about this example, right, is that Iranian students really understood the US was not some site of, despite its Cold War propaganda, it was not some paradise of freedom and democracy and liberation. It was a site of tremendous structural inequality and oppression that people were resisting, and so that's where they situated themselves, right? And I think that that's true today. So that, we don't have to say that women in the US are oppressed the same way as women in Iran in order to draw connections between the different forms of patriarchal authoritarianism and religious fundamentalism that is deployed against women and gender and sexual minorities in the US and in Iran. It's different, but quite frankly, we have related struggles here for bodily autonomy. I mean, to be able to live freely and to have control over our bodies. And that's just one example. I think we can think about another example in terms of breaking down the binary. In other words, if we don't presume that the West is already this site of freedom and liberation, right? If we actually look at what's happening in the West, right, we can see, issues like mass incarceration, which is of course a site of tremendous activism in the United States, right? Abolitionist feminism and many other things, right? Well, Iran has mass incarceration. I mean, we hear mostly about political prisoners, but in fact, Iran has a mass incarceration system modeled on that of the US. They have a war on drugs, they have a war on poverty, they incarcerate migrants. I mean, it's related, right? And in fact, it really is related. And there's a historian, Golnar Nikpour, whose research is all about this, and her book is coming out about this. It's all about the modern prison system in Iran and its development in relation to that of the West. So in other words, what if we think about the US and Iran not as polar opposites, right? But as countries with their own specific histories, with very different amounts of global power, of course, but nonetheless, as societies that are really unequal, really hierarchical, and really oppressive in different ways, and that people have a right to challenge that in both places, and people are challenging that in both places. And how could we imagine building grassroots solidarity between those struggles, learning from each other's struggles, rather than identifying with governments, right? So I think that's how you break it down. You start at the grassroots, you start from below, and you look at where are the actual struggles of ordinary people trying to change the repressive conditions of their society. Okay, Elmira.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for this. I really enjoyed learning more about your research. And what you said about the polar opposites really struck me. And the way that you're finding and creating this sort of different way so that it's, you can still pursue freedom and justice without being labeled as Western or align yourself with like pro-government regimes, right? And it reminded me of the concept of the third space from Chicana and like Global South feminism. And because of that, it made me wonder if what you're creating, this sort of alternative position, does it depend on one's location and positionality? So is it different if someone is in the diaspora, and like even the diaspora too depends, if you're in the US versus somewhere in Europe or Canada, or versus like if you're in Iran and still in this sort of like alternative space, right? Or is what you're kind of coming up with not related to one's like location and position, and more so kind of going towards a unity or solidarity where like anyone, regardless of sort of like where you are or what your perspective is, can sort of embody this space?
I love this question. Thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking, I think, I do think it matters where you are. I definitely think it matters where you are. And I think actually for Chicanx feminisms and indigenous feminisms, that relationship to the land, really matters, right? It really, really matters. And becomes a space from which to theorize, right? It is very rooted, very connected to place. So I do think it matters. I think because we're in the United States, like I think if I were part of the Iranian diaspora living somewhere else, I don't think I would feel the same kind of urgent ethical calling to, every time I criticize the Islamic Republic, I also feel I must point out that US imperialism is part of the problem too, and is not the solution. And that's because I'm in the US. So I think for a lot of Iranians in Iran, of course, nobody wants to be invaded and occupied. That kind of goes without saying. It's kind of like so obvious, no one has to say it. And for a lot of people in Iran, anti-imperialism is the rhetoric of the state that they're fighting against. So it's not a part of the discourse of resistance. In fact, from the perspective of people in Iran, the main source of their oppression is their own government. You know, I mean, that is how people articulate it, you know, and that is their experience. That is how they feel. I mean, of course, people understand there's a relationship between Western sanctions and like the economic crisis in Iran, but they mostly blame their own government. They really do. They mostly blame their own government for corruption, mismanagement, not caring about the people, stealing from the people's funds, enriching themselves off. You know, you don't find the go-to is not like US sanctions are the problem. That is just not at all people's experience, even though like, you know, empirically we can look at what's the relationship between US sanctions and the corruption and, you know, mismanagement of the Iranian government. So, but my point is just that location absolutely matters. I think if I were living in a global South country, I might be able to offer South-South forms of solidarity. I wouldn't be straddling the same structural hierarchy of being in an imperial, the biggest imperial power, trying to figure out how to be in solidarity, you know. So I absolutely think location matters. At the same time, I think, especially because of social media, the diaspora itself becomes its own like political ecosystem, right? With certain ideas that circulate, right, within the diaspora itself that may or may not have any resonance in Iran, you know, but the diaspora itself becomes this site of kind of the circulation of affect, the circulation of political ideologies and, you know, particular figures and particular discourses. So it kind of takes on this life of its own too, that one has to contend with, that may or may not be related to what people in Iran are talking about, you know? So I think that's part of it. Thank you for that. I see.
Thank you.
Lynn. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Lynn? Oh, did you want me to read your question or did you want to?
Lynn's mic hasn't been working.
Oh, sorry. Okay, then I'll just read it. So in the chat, Lynn put, how do you think engaging in international political struggles can aid in revolutionary affect? Well, I think that revolutionary affect circulates across borders. I mean, you know, like I said, in the diaspora, I mean, 2009 was not really a revolutionary moment. It was about more reform. But, you know, certainly since September, with the recent uprising, the desire for a transformation of Iranian society, to change the government, to, you know, have a different kind of Iran, that affective attachment to making a new revolution has like rippled through the diaspora. So I think that the solidarity from the diaspora is driven by a kind of revolutionary affective attachment to this future possible Iran, right? And, you know, I think that affect, because it is, of course, somewhat inchoate and it is loaded with potential and it is indeterminate, you know, it has to be channeled, right? I think that's some of the work that social movements do. And in the book, I refer to different theorists of affect and sociologists like Deborah Gould and others who've talked about the role that social movements play in kind of orienting people's affective capacities in one direction or another, right? So I think that revolutionary affects are circulating widely in the diaspora. They're motivating all kinds of solidarity, you know, tremendous cultural production, outpouring of visual and performance art, statements, new groups being formed, you know, all kinds of social media campaigns and petitions, and, you know, just so, it's like a frenzy of activity, really, that we've been many of us have been engaging in for the last several months. But, you know, in terms of politically, where the affects are channeled, what forms they take, what ideologies or figures or parties or groups or ideas they attach to, that is not predetermined. And that is very much sort of a battle of ideas that's raging right now. But I definitely think that the kind of international the transnational, the circulation of revolutionary affects from Iran throughout the diaspora is what's driving all of this struggle and activity. I hope I've answered your question. Okay, Patrick.
Not unmute, oopsie daisy. Hello, hello.
Hi.
I
Hi.
have very much enjoyed this talk thus far. And the question that I was going to ask is, what have you observed in the way of like revolutionary solidarity between marginalized groups in the modern day, as opposed to like previous years, decades, etc.? How have things like changed, stayed the same, strengthened, deteriorated, been affected by mass communications and various things like that sort of thing? You can answer it in whatever like narrowing. I know it's a bit of a broader question, but that's the general gist of it.
Great, thank you for that question. I'm going to use that as a jumping off point to share some of my slides. Because it's totally relevant. I mean, my like totally oversimplified response, I mean, you know, it's a huge question, lots of different things we could say about it. My super duper oversimplified response is that it's much harder today to build those kinds of solidarities than it was during the, you know, 50s, 60s, and 70s, which was a high point of anti-colonial and anti-racist movements globally, right? So, you know, and it was the Cold War, and there were a whole bunch of kind of historical factors that really facilitated joint organizing and solidarity back then, many of which no longer exist. And if I had to quickly summarize, I think the main factors that no longer exist, I think what no longer exists is the Soviet Union, which many of us were very, very critical of, but nonetheless, it was supposed to be some kind of, you know, alternative to capitalism. I mean, we can argue about what it actually was or whatever, but with the collapse of the Soviet Union and really the collapse of a lot of socialist and communist parties and really the formal organized left collapsed, not just collapsed, but like lost credibility, right? Because it had turned into dictatorships, right? So you had the kind of delegitimization or collapse of all of the things that were supposed to be the alternative to capitalism, that were supposed to be the things people were fighting for. And this also had a huge impact on the global South, or what was called the Third World during the Cold War, which is that so many of the anti-colonial revolutions turned into dictatorships and or sort of neo-colonial arrangements, right? So that the overthrow of formal colonial powers or puppet regimes didn't lead to, again, the forms of liberation, freedom, equality that people had been fighting for. So there's just like massive demoralization and sort of political crisis. And of course, the US declares that it won the Cold War, that capitalism is triumphant, it's the end of history, the famous Fukuyama quote. And the left is very, very weakened, but also has lost credibility. So we have an absence of kind of like parties, ideologies, and real concrete alternatives that people believe in and really think can work. So I think that's one of the biggest crises. I think when it comes to and the way that neoliberalism sort of like divides us and tries to co-opt, you know, minoritized populations. I mean, there's a lot of problems. But the other thing with Iran in particular is that, you know, because Iran is not a US ally, and so the repression of the Islamic Republic cannot be blamed on US imperialism. So this becomes difficult for people who are organized around opposing US imperialism, which is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, which is, I'm quoting Martin Luther King, right, during the Vietnam era. I think it's still probably true, but it's not the only purveyor of violence in the world. And there are now, of course, there are, you know, independent governments that are brutally repressive to their people. So what do we do about that, right? And it brings me back to the same problem of these binaries and how to have an intersectional anti-imperialism, but it makes it harder for Iran to become a site of affective attachment, affective solidarity for other groups, right? Because it looks confusing. It's like, wait, but isn't the Iranian government against imperialism? And I'm against imperialism. So should I support the people who are against the anti-imperialist government? I thought the anti-imperialist government was against imperialism, right? So like we have kind of some extra work we have to do if we really want to build solidarity. But but let me, because you all are at San Francisco State, and I will just take the liberty of being the guest speaker to digress and just tell you all that San Francisco State was a really key site for some of the joint organizing and cross-pollination among Iranian students and other liberation movements. And for those of you who read chapter 4 in Dr. Ray's class, you already know this, but I wanted to actually show you some of the images that I write about in that chapter. So I will share my screen. And what I don't like about this is then I can't see you all, but I will trust that you're still there. Uh-oh. Okay, there it is. Can you all see everything?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Okay, so in chapter 4, I write about the San Francisco State strike and the Third World Liberation Front. And I talk about this action that happened a year before the strike started, when several members of the Black Student Union had been unjustly suspended without due process, and there was a lot of racism against them, and there had been kind of racist attacks on the affirmative action policies. And so there was this rally that happened December 4th, 1967 on your campus. And it was to protest these suspensions. And you'll see what happened was that the president at the time, John Summerskill, had ordered the administration building should be locked from the inside to prevent students from entering. So I'm just going to play this for you, and I hope you can hear it. I realize that I might not have selected the right screen share with the audio, but anyway, let's try it. And you'll let me know if you can't hear it.
Yes, myself.
We can hear it, but it's a little low.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you're watching is Iranian Students Association member Khosrow Kalantari kicking in the glass door of the administration building, and you'll see in a minute what happens. Right, so this is Khosrow. That's Khosrow going in, and everyone else goes in behind him. So I'm just going to stop the share if I can for a second so that I can see you guys. I just tell you. So so Khosrow, kicks in the glass, goes inside, hundreds of students follow, and it turns into this huge building occupation, which really escalates the confrontation and conflict between the students and the administration. And the president is so upset by this militant turn that he shuts the entire campus down and holds a press conference calling this like verging on civil insurrection. And this is really it's a moment where in hindsight we realize there's kind of no going back. Like we're now on a collision course toward the strike. And so seeing this Iranian guy Khosrow Kalantari helping to lead this militant action, it's like, well, what is he doing there? And later during the actual strike, he gets arrested, and he has to flee to Canada to avoid deportation back to Iran, because being a member of the Iranian Students Association was a punishable offense in Iran. You had, I think, a minimum 10-year jail sentence. And of course, in jail, they were torturing people. There was this US trained secret police force called SAVAK that was notorious for its torture tactics against political dissidents. So, the stakes were kind of high. Why was Khosrow willing to risk risk arrest and deportation to fight against racism at San Francisco State and to defend Black students. And, it's like, how do we make sense of that, right? Because the demands were not anything to do with Iran, and he wasn't the only one. Parviz Shokat, Hamid Kosari, another guy who didn't want me to use his name. So there were a whole bunch of them, who were part of this, and several of them went to jail, actually. I mean, Parviz went to jail, and they used cold water hoses on them in prison, and they tried to force them to shave their beards. And, it was really like, a terrible situation. And again, he could have been deported too. So in order to try to explain the stakes of some of this, like why they were so willing to throw their bodies into these movements and struggles that were really not connected directly to their own demands, that's where I ended up going to affect, right? And thinking about how affective capacities can, remain long after the encounters that produce them, and are loaded with this sort of potential, in this case, potential for militancy, political action, that in the context of this kind of third worldist moment, student activism in the Bay Area, where the desire to resist unjust state power that, was very much an embodied part of the lived experience that these Iranians brought with them from the dictatorship in Iran, that desire attached and sort of resonated with and built upon the desires of Black students, other Asian students, Indigenous students, Latinx students who were also trying to resist unjust state power, discrimination, police violence, right? So I had that's where I ended up really thinking about the affective capacities that we need to understand and think about in order to make sense of why people are moved in these ways, right? That are not explainable by some sort of rigid notion of self-interest or identity, right? Or a particular ideology, I mean, it's true there were shared ideologies, but again, why do those ideologies become so compelling that you throw your body, on the line, right? So it was really exciting to find that footage because I had interviewed people who talked about that, participating in that, and then I actually found, like the hard evidence. That doesn't happen that often. So when you're doing kind of oral history interviews, that you can then also find like an archival piece that exactly fits the story. So that was kind of a gem. And I'll just share, one or two more images real quick. And let's see. So this is from the strike itself the following year, on one of the days of like the mass mobilizations that they called. And you can see in the front line, these are leaders of the Third World Liberation Front. And right here in the second row is Khosrow. He just kept showing up in the archives, although, like I said, there were other ISA members involved. And then this is a satirical leaflet put out by the strike committee, wanted for crimes against the state being a pun. It's like San Francisco State and, the state of California. And remember, at the time, Ronald Reagan is governor. And it's a very kind of overtly racist, very hostile, climate in terms of the state government as well. And, it's kind of a hilarious list of things.
Can you advance it? We can't see.
You can't see it?
No, I see Khosrow in the crowd.
Oh, weird. I'm looking at don't know how to.
Click on the image on your left side of the image that's there.
I only have one side. Let me just try again.
Yeah. There it is. There it is. There it is.
Can you guys see it? I know, and it's smaller now.
We can see it. Yeah.
Okay. So so there's that. And then here's another example. This is from New York City. The artist Nikki Najumi made this poster. It's in the book, right? When Bobby Seale, obviously one of the founders of the Black Panther Party, was in prison, and so was Angela Davis. And so, one of the main activities that Iranian Students Association members engaged in was campaigning to free political prisoners in Iran, to expose the injustice of that process in Iran and put pressure on the US government, to put pressure on the Shah to reduce sentences, spare people's lives, release them. So when it came to, you know, Black activists being imprisoned for their activism, it was like a no-brainer. It was like obvious. It was like, oh yeah, these are political prisoners right here. Of course, we're going to campaign for their freedom too, right? So the ISA would go to rallies to free Huey Newton. They would campaign, you know, to free Bobby Seale, Angela Davis, and they would, you know, they kind of plastered this poster like all over the, you know, downtown Manhattan as like part of their weekly activities, right? It just kind of got woven in. To their activities. And this is from a rally against the Vietnam War in San Francisco. And so you can see among the signs in support of the Vietnamese, you also have Down with the Shah. And here in the back, there's an Arab Students Organization sign. And so again, you know, everyone kind of would come together, bringing their own grievances, their own particular struggles into the mix, because the liberation of the Vietnamese people became a site of tremendous affective attachment. So that for those of you who read chapter 4, I think it's in chapter 4, but one of the people I interviewed who was involved, Jaleh Pierre Nazar, says, you know, when the victory happened in Vietnam, it felt like it was our victory too. You know, that's how deeply affiliated and identified they were with the Vietnamese struggle. Yeah, in fact, this is from the Persian language journal of the Iranian students, or really of so the Iranian Students Association, of course, was part of the Transnational Confederation of Iranian Students, which had chapters in all over Europe and Canada. The ISA was the US one. So they were affiliated, and this was their Persian language publication that circulated through all the chapters. And they covered the Vietnamese struggle you know, in great depth and with great, you know, really, a lot of affective energy. They were really supportive. Yeah. And this is another area I write about, right? It was the solidarity with Palestine. And so the ISA did a lot of joint organizing with the Arab Students Association. And it's because, you know, they really understood, number one, that the Shah was part of the problem. The Shah was also a kind of watchdog for US interests in the region, kind of working hand in glove with the Israeli state. And also because they also had a regional perspective. You know, they didn't think they could just liberate Iran and Iran would just be this island of freedom. You know, they actually wanted, you know, the whole region to be free, right? And this is so important because of the dominance of a kind of anti-Arab sentiment among a lot of Iranians, a kind of version, it's like a Persian nationalism that's very anti-Arab that the Shah promoted, and that unfortunately has a new lease on life since the overthrow of the Shah, because people sort of in diaspora especially, but not only, their opposition to the Islamic Republic can take an anti-Arab form, because the Islamic Republic, again, opportunistically and I think very cynically, kind of uses the Palestinian cause, champions the Palestinian cause in a way that, you know, people react against, and then they become very, you know, anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian. So again, we end up with another binary, right? And that's deeply problematic. And instead of being able to say, like, you know, you can be against Zionism and against settler colonialism and against the Islamic Republic, because actually if the starting point is self-determination and freedom and liberation, there's no contradiction there, right? But unfortunately, there's a lot of anti-Arab sentiment among Iranians. So I wanted to really highlight this history, you know, that wasn't always there. That's not the only way to have an Iranian identity. You know, you actually can, you know, from the experience of being Iranian, you can deeply identify, you know, with others in the region, and especially as it was back then, the Palestinian movement really became a meeting place for all progressive activists from all backgrounds. So I wanted to really focus on that as well. Okay. Sorry, that was a lot, but I wanted to throw all that at you so you could have some of those images, and maybe I will go back to the questions. Saba, I see your hand.
Hi, so I'm wondering, in chapter 5 of your text, you discuss the devolution of leftist movements such as the ISA and the Black Panther Party, in part as a result of pervasive misogyny within the organizations. And I'm wondering about whether you think that the current struggle for liberation and justice in Iran has more potential for growth and sustainability, because at its core, it was started in response to misogyny. So I'm wondering if you think this is a different has different chances because of its motivation is different and is more about women and women's liberation.
Yeah, I love this question. It's something I've been thinking through a lot lately, that you're absolutely right that back then the dominant mode was a kind of masculinist national liberation politics. Of course, women were totally involved and were at every level, and but nonetheless involved on certain terms and certain conditions through certain idioms and with certain ideas about what they were fighting for. And gender and sexuality were like not on the short list of, they were not the priority, right? They were secondary at best and sometimes dismissed altogether. It was important for me to point out that that was true, not just for Iranians, because some people want to say it has to do with Iranian culture or Islam. Well, then how can we explain the fact that these were the same debates and problems plaguing so many other organizations, from the white left in SDS to the Black Panthers to, example after example, right? So this was a kind of constitutive problem of not just the dominance of patriarchy, yes, but also like the way that national liberation and anti-imperialism were conceptualized, which I'm calling hierarchical, right? That there was this primary, people would talk about, there's a primary contradiction, which is imperialism, and then there are secondary things that come later, like maybe women's rights or something like that, right? And you're absolutely right, Saba, that the starting point for the uprising in Iran is very, very different. So that gender and sexual oppression and liberation are the starting point, right? Rather than secondary, they're primary. In fact, those issues became the catalyst for all the other grievances to kind of pile on, from the economic grievances, the grievances of ethnic and religious minorities, and many other things. But it's no longer possible to argue that gender and sexuality are side issues or secondary issues or distractions or divisive. In fact, they were the unifying things that brought a national uprising into the streets. So I do think we're in a really different place politically. I think that the fact that the movement began with these kinds of feminist forms of self-emancipation, feminist aspirations, demands, it not only changes the way people struggle, but it also changes what we're fighting for, right? So we are in this Iran really is post-colonial, right? It really is this sovereign nation, despite sanctions, it is. And so we're no longer confused into thinking that like what we need is sovereignty, and if we have national sovereignty, then all other things will flow from that, right? We know from history that's not true, number one, but also we have that in Iran, and it's clearly not enough. So yeah, I think what people are fighting for is different. It's really it really is a much more capacious and I think very intersectional feminist idea about what is the meaning of freedom and what kind of society do we want to have, and that it's not enough to change the formal government, although people absolutely want to change their government, but they also want to change social relations, right? They want to change the way they feel in their bodies. They want to change the way they relate to one another, the way they move in public space. People want to change everything, right? And I think that's profoundly feminist because it breaks down those divisions between public and private, domestic and it breaks down the sort of realm of formal politics as sort of parliament or whatever, and then everything else is not politics. It's like, no, this is a very feminist understanding of what is political, of what the sites of struggle are. And so, yeah, I think it's tremendously inspiring and powerful. I think that if it were to succeed, it would bode well, and it would present much more hopeful possibilities for what the new post-revolutionary society could look like. But I think that there's a big gap between the, the sort of like beautiful feminist visions of what people want and understand to be necessary for freedom, and actually having the power, right, to bring that into being. That's the big gap. That's the big crisis that I see.
Manijeh, I just wanted to thank you, but we're going to fill that gap, right? So I just wanted to note the time. It is officially the end of class. So I wanted to release the students who need to get going. But I was wondering if you had a few extra minutes to take remaining questions, or if you need to go.
I do have a few minutes. I have like about 10 minutes, and I'm so sorry I was late before. So yeah, I'm happy to stay for a few minutes, and then I do have to pick up my daughter from school, but it's across the street. So
yeah, well, that is a priority, for sure. So thank you all from the class who were able to come. If you're able to stay and want to ask one or two last questions, please feel free to do that. And I'll check in with the class via email shortly afterwards, later this afternoon. Okay, so thank you all who need to head off. And if you can stay for final questions, please do.
Thank you so much.
Okay, is that going to be everyone fleeing? We do book the classes very close together over here. So
oh yeah, no, I'm sure.
Any last questions, folks?
Manijeh, do you think that I'm just wondering about, the view that you present of the past is a model for thinking about the future, right? In terms of like, how can we go back to, you point out some of the things that are no longer there, but what is the constant that you see in terms of a vision for either creating a different political future in Iran and the US? If, for example, like to me, I guess I'll say the one constant that I see is the way that war and military occupations are sucking up so many resources. And to me, that embodies a kind of feminist critique in and of itself. Do you see in, say, your work of doing activism around the stuff around Iran, or I know you're putting an event together for March 8th, do you see that people still have some of those constants around which they can orbit and find each other, particularly in this country?
That's such a good question.
Manijeh, I'm sorry. I was wondering if you could also just take Che's question and then answer.
Fabulous. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for staying later. And I wanted to say I really enjoyed reading the chapters that we were assigned. And also I'm a friend of Gulnar Nikpor's, and I love her work so much. So that's cool that you mentioned her. I'll try to keep my question quick. It's kind of a two-parter, so feel free to just speak briefly on whatever you're interested in, if any of it.
Okay.
So my first question is, what are your thoughts on the US mainstream narratives, like in cinema, media, on the history of liberation movements in the US and potentially erasure of the Iranian students' presence in those movements? Or maybe what are possibilities of revolutionary affect and cinema across borders, especially in the context of today and the recent uprisings in Iran?
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm going to start with Dr. Karim's question because I've been thinking about it a lot. I agree with you. I think militarism and war, absolutely. I think patriarchal authoritarianism and religious fundamentalisms, Christian, Zionist, Islamist, right? Like I do think there's, like, I think if we start with your point, that perspective, like what do we have in common, rather than all these polar opposites and binaries and whatever, if we start there, there's a lot actually that potentially unites us and brings us together. And I think, one thing that I've seen happening is Iranians and Afghans, really think, because of the Taliban and because of the Islamic Republic, really trying to think about, the problems of fundamentalism, the problems of war, occupation, imperialism, the experience of Afghan women of having both foreign occupation and and Taliban, and right, like that there are these like multiple forms of or sources of reactionary patriarch, that are not always on the same side, but actually work together in ways that actually are at the expense of women, right? And restrict and constrict the life chances of women. And so how do we think about that? So, I'm encouraged by some of the joint organizing that's happening a little bit now between Iranians, Afghans, Kurds. I've been thinking a lot about how to, in practice, build solidarity between Iranians and Palestinians, kind of take that away. How do we take that away from the Islamic Republic and reclaim that for our side, right? And like the Palestinian Feminist Collective, I'm trying to like do some work with them. And, they have this wonderful slogan, or it might be the slogan of Talat, another feminist organization in Palestine, but their slogan is "No free homeland without free women." And when I hear that, I think, well, that's what women, life, freedom. That's what the slogan of our uprising means, right? It's the same idea, it's the same concept, right? So I do think that a kind of feminist response to militarism, patriarchal authoritarianism, state violence, intimate violence, I think these are the potential sites, but I don't know. I think it's going to take a lot of work for other people to see Iran as a site of affective solidarity. Like I feel like Iranians, some of us are reaching out and like wanting to connect, but Iran's like not super on the radar of like a lot of, say, like abolitionist feminists in the US, right? And but it's an opportunity to be like, actually, women, life, freedom, this is actually a movement against, to abolish, to get rid of this prison system, right? To get rid of mass incarceration, so, there's the potential there, but it's like, it's not a default. It's not automatic. It's not the go-to like it was, for some people, in the high point of anti-colonial movements. I think it just is going to take a lot of legwork, a lot of like building relationships. And then really quickly, sorry, these are just such good questions. I feel like we could talk for another hour. Yeah, the ISA has been pretty erased. You're absolutely right, Che. It doesn't figure in any of the kind of mainstream narratives about the 60s and 70s. And I think that introducing the ISA into that narrative can do a couple of things. Like one, it can help disrupt the kind of co-optation of those narratives, right? The kind of domestication of those narratives, as if the struggles at SF State, the strike, Third World Liberation Front, as if all they wanted was sort of like inclusion within an existing system, right? Or sort of, just more representation for different marginalized identities, instead of what they really wanted, which was like a radical transformation of like what the purpose of education was, right? They wanted to be part of shaping it and be present and have more Black students and faculty and all of that. But it was also like, what's the purpose of education? Is it to like train model minorities to go off and, have like a more diverse, capitalism, or should education be about, arming us with ideas and tools and traditions and strategies that can help us transform our society, right? So that more radical transformative piece, it's easy to kind of lock that off and turn it into more of a, representational, multicultural kind of thing. And if you bring the ISA in, it brings back that question of imperialism. It brings back that question of anti-colonial revolutionary politics, right? Because it's the experience of a US-backed dictatorship, right? That's what brought those students into these struggles. And so it kind of helps to remind us that the students who were organizing at SF State saw themselves as part of a global movement against, imperialism, capitalism, and racism, really. And that's what the fight at SF State was really about, right? And it gets kind of, I mean, you all are there, you know this better than me, but it gets a bit, it gets remembered in some much more tame ways. So I think that's important. And revolutionary affects of cinema. I mean, cinema is deeply affecting. I think I would love to see a documentary about the ISA. I had 2 different groups of filmmakers approach me at different points that they were making this film, and then like nobody could really come up with the funding to like see it through. But yeah, I wish there was a much more kind of like widespread, accessible way of transmitting this history. So maybe someday somebody will make that film. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for all this feminist labor conversation, history. It's so inspiring. We're so grateful for your energy and your commitment and expertise. It really is so resonant with what's happening here at State. So thank you. And Persis, thanks for sponsoring and co-organizing. And any last words from you, Persis?
No, it just made me inspired to think about universities as sites for organizing. And I hope that some of these lovely young students feel like this is still an opportunity that we should take advantage of, So thank you, Manijeh. I know you've had a busy week and lots going on, and you're doing talks.
This was a highlight. This was truly pleasurable. I deeply appreciate your wonderful questions, everybody, and the wonderful teaching and leadership of Dr. Ray and Dr. Kareem. So thank you so much for having me with you all.
Thanks so much, and hope to see you soon.
Yes. Okay. Bye, everyone.